Regrettably, I'm about to cause trouble. Written and narrated by Amie McNee. Chapter 27. We kept holding hands even after we had left the room. There was a long silence as we walked through Hampton Court's corridors. Rufus knew this castle. We didn't touch a courtyard and I hardly saw a soul, but even deep in the belly of the palace, in the candlelit turrets, I could feel the stone reverberating with festive drunkenness. The loud laughs of courtiers who had never had to control their volume was creeping through the cracks in the cold stone and filling the silent space between me and Rufus. He stopped. I thought perhaps we had arrived. "Maude, I'm not trying to protect you. I don't want to treat you like a child." He paused. "Good," I said, uncertain. "But I just want to warn you that the king, he's more licentious than I have ever seen him." "Right. I'm just here to play the trumpet, and you've been called for your wisdom, but we are all at the whims of his desires, and he has a lot of desires at the moment." "What are you saying?" He rolled out his neck. He was tired. I squeezed his hand. "Are you well?" He squeezed my hand back. "Just prepare your eyes for a lot of Adam and Eve." I frowned. "Naked people topping one another." "Exactly. You should have just said that." I let out a controlled breath. "I can handle that." He smiled back. "I know you can." We kept walking. "Wait!" I stopped, suddenly panicked. "Your mother isn't in there as far as I can tell," he said, reading my mind. "But I don't know what your father or brothers or husband look like, so there is a chance." Oh, Christ. We started ascending a spiral stone staircase. At the top was a single door guarded by one man. "Is that who we wanted?" The guard in livery looked down his nose at me. "I'm a witch," I said loudly before Rufus could defend me. The guard shrugged and opened the door lazily. "And you should watch out for the clap because I see it in your future," I whispered as we passed. I heard him take a breath just as Rufus let out an amused exhalation. Adam and Eve after the fall, after the modesty and shame wore off, and they had built themselves a palace and filled it with decadent furniture, invited their friends, stripped off their clothes, and told them to lie on the furniture. That, Adam and Eve. The king was clothed. I did not immediately sight the royal member. He was sitting by the window, and, though he was not naked, I could see his bare chest through his loose white blouse. He was laughing and drinking, his feet up on a small table. I recognized but could not name his friend. He had a woman sitting on his lap. She was clothed too, but her breasts were spilt out and her skirts were up and around her very nicely shaped thighs. Rufus gave me a little nudge in the back, and we approached the king. In my peripheral vision, I thought I saw actual tupping. I curtsied. "I've fetched good woman Maude, your majesty," said Rufus. "Very good, reasonable." "The men have asked for the healer and the stargazer. May I send a man to fetch them?" Rufus continued. "Do so. Then make the others play a new song. This one is too somber." I stayed low, staring into my skirts. "Rise, witch." I rose, composing my face into what I hoped was a mild and unsurprised expression. "Entertain yourself for a while," he instructed. "I will call for you later." I bowed again and moved away. How to mingle in a party such as this? I looked to Rufus, who had returned to his musicians. He pointed towards the door. Blessed stars, Zita and Hildy were there already. I hurried to them. "I don't know what to do. The king doesn't need me yet." "Stand by us. We will set up our cards and crystal." We found spare chairs and a small, sticky, wine-stained table. Zita's nose was wrinkled in disgust. I sat next to them and finally took in the scene. There was another dwarf, younger than Good Thatcher, and dressed only in undergarments, dancing on a table near the back. Men were throwing coin at her as she danced. She winked at me, and I smiled. I hoped she got to keep the coin. There was gambling and card games going on in the far corner. I heard the tingling of dropped gold and an uproar of delight and disgruntled disappointment as someone undoubtedly won a rather large hand. The musicians were playing in front of the fire. One of the nude ladies had stolen a lute and was playing it very badly. The real lute player looked put off, to say the least. These were the finest men in court, bedraggled, drunk, and swimming in sin. Zita and Hildy attracted a crowd almost immediately. We went to work. Over time, I detected a distinct change in atmosphere. It was becoming more than drunkenness. It was a room of beasts with permission to do whatever they pleased. I could feel Hildy getting overwhelmed. She couldn't read the lips of men shouting at her. Their language was hard enough to understand with good ears. They spoke so slurred and messy. "Tell me when I will bear a son. How many women shall I tuck tonight? Which woman should I choose?" said someone, shoving 2 actual women in my face. I couldn't see between their legs and bodies that surrounded me. Even Hildy, who was once only a span away from me, was whisked off by the madness. I was plied with drinks. I had a bare-bottomed woman sit on my lap and force me to try a chalice of something that tasted like fire. I was overloaded, but trying to remain calm, always aware of the king in the corner of the chamber. I gave out several dozen blessings for good love-making, yelling them over the noise. A woman with her breast in my face very genuinely asked me for a cure for an itching purse, so I sent her to Hildy. Surely the sun would rise soon. "How do we know these are going to work?" barked a man wearing 2 stuffed ferrets, letting them sit around his neck like a gold chain. "I am a witch, my lord." "But how do we know?" Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man trying to kiss Zita. I felt sick. I looked to Rufus, but his attention had been taken by a woman who was grinding her backside up against him. He looked annoyed. "How do we know?" my client asked again. "Yeah, prove it to us. Perform a spell," said a very beautiful woman with very rouged cheeks. "She'll have a mark," said Thomas fucking Cromwell. That cunt was really out to get me. He sat, seemingly sober, in a chair not far from me. "Do you have a mark?" he asked, his voice carrying easily over the noise. I nodded. "Most witches do, my lord." My head span. "But doesn't my wild hair prove it enough for you?" "Show it to us." The idea spread through the group of men like fire in hay. It consumed all their minds, and now I was sat in the centre of a fortress of lords trying to undress me. I felt the threat of violence. I was about to be ripped apart. I held up a hand. "I'll show you," I barked, trying to gain some semblance of control. A naked woman helped me out of my corset. There was much clapping and hooting as the process progressed. I tried not to shrink. I felt like I was fading away, but I didn't want to fade away. I didn't want these men to make me fade away. My corset fell to the floor, and I was only in my chemise. "There it is! It's huge!" Was this better or worse than my experience with my husband? I pondered the question. I think it was marginally better. At least I wasn't trying to hide. "I'm keeping my shift on. You can see well enough. It is too cold to be without." "How far does it go down there?" asked someone. "Not to my toes," I yelled. "Your beauty exceeds mediocrity," said the working girl who had undressed me. I was unsure whether this was a compliment, but she looked very genuine. A younger man lunged at me, grabbing the hem of my shift and pulling it over my head. I lashed out. I heard a collective "ah" as I struggled with whichever devil was holding my dress. I felt a hand on my belly and I kicked out with my foot, making contact with someone's soft parts. I wrenched down my chemise and felt someone grab me from behind, pulling me out of the crowd. It was Zita. She pulled me back into a corner of the room. The men followed, but Rufus stood between them and me. "I shouldn't have brought you." Zita's bright blue eyes were wet with tears. I put a hand on her shoulder. "I am unharmed, Zita." She shook her head, apparently furious with herself. "I am unharmed," I said again. She took hold of my hand. "I'm so sorry." I felt someone else's eyes on me. I looked to my left and froze. My husband, Edward Beckett, was looking at me. I blinked slowly, sure it was a vision. It was not a vision. I looked at his face and read him. He was afraid. It gave me an inch of my power back. I pointed at him. My nails were long and witchy. I pointed at him and smiled. A big, huge, terrifying smile. He broke at the knees. I heard them smack on the floor. His kinsman came to his aid. The king had been watching the ruckus from the window. "You will leave my witch alone," he finally barked at them all. Better late than never, I suppose. "She is invited here to serve me. She is not a plaything for all your whims." He moved towards me, parting the crowd. "Get dressed, or don't, and then come sit with me." "Yes, Your Majesty." When I was presentable, I went to the king's chair by the window. Rufus said nothing, but would not take his eyes from me, monitoring me for signs of distress. I did not feel distress. I wondered if I was holding it all at bay for one big breakdown when I was finally alone. I could no longer see my husband. Merry Christmas, Henry said, smiling and looking me up and down. Merry Christmas, Your Majesty, I smiled. Do you find my chambers festive? Does it remind you of your Christmas at home? I took the liberty of looking around. It reminds me of one particular Christmas, Your Majesty. He raised a wily eyebrow, amused. I continued. When I escaped my governess on Christmas morning before she could wrestle me into a dress, and I ran around the halls naked, filled with the Christmas spirit. I was but 4 or 5. He looked at me curiously. What witch has a governess? I felt my body go cold. I didn't say anything. He looked at me, genuinely curious. How do we know she is a witch? Said the man sat opposite him. Did you not just see me being stripped by your kinsman, sir? I asked with a bite. I am marked by the divine. The king took me by the wrist and brought me closer. What do you see in my dear friend Lord Seymour? He pushed me into the Seymour man's lap. I thought to remind him I wasn't one of his whores, but I held my tongue. I might as well be. Lord Seymour had grey eyes. I picked up his hand with my own and felt how reluctant he was to be held. I stared into his eyes a long time. Don't break eye contact, Edward, said Henry, laughing. Eventually, I felt Edward's body succumb to my gaze. I saw his discomfort at being here. I saw a sadness and a vulnerability that were quite beautiful. I had touched upon something in his heart. His eyes were beginning to water. His wife, I think. I felt a quake in his chest, and he broke the connection. My eyes are watering from not blinking, he laughed, rubbing them. I got off his knee. What did you see, Maude? I looked pointedly at Henry, not saying anything. Go entertain yourself with a whore, Seymour. The lord looked nervous, but did as asked. Take his seat, Maude. I sat down. What did you see? I felt very uncomfortable telling secrets. It felt like malfeasance, but if anyone was going to make me spill the beans, it was going to be the king. His heart is broken, I said in an undertone. His wife. Henry nodded. Yes, it is rumoured she is sleeping with Seymour Sr. She's sleeping with her husband's father. Henry nodded. Well, that's what's on his mind, not much else. I had thought as much. I am sorry for the rowdiness of this crowd. Festivities often turn to frivolities which turn to savagery, I suppose. I am surviving, Your Majesty. Yes, I am glad Reasonable rescued you. He hadn't, Zita had, but I let him have it. I am always glad of Reasonable. What did you see in Her Majesty's eyes? I had known this was coming, of course. She's scared, Your Majesty. She was very guarded. Like she's hiding something from me. It wasn't a question. Possibly. If you had more time with her, would you be able to see more deeply into her soul? What a fucking question. Perhaps. He stared into his chalice for a long time. He uncrossed his legs and spread them bizarrely far apart again. He indicated I was to get nearer to him. Awkwardly, I shuffled my chair. It screeched along the ground. I want to enlist your services to be with Anne and her ladies until the 12 days of Christmas are at their end. To what end, Your Majesty? He beckoned me further in, then grabbed me almost violently and placed me on his knee, like a child. It is said that she is one of your kind, Maude. He was whispering, his breath tickling my ear. I looked out into the crowd and immediately made eye contact with Hildy. She had been watching me. I want you to learn if the rumours are true, if she has any otherworldly ability, any witch-like tendencies. He touched my cheek, pulling my face in to look at his. I could feel his breath on my lips. And if she is? I respect your craft, Maude, but my great kingdom deserves more than a witch at her helm. I nodded. I know it is not like your kind to betray another of the coven. I thought he was going to threaten me with death. I thought he was going to make me imagine the silver edge of the axe on my neck. So let me pay you for your faithfulness. He was whispering in my ear again, his lips touching my skin. In spite of myself, I felt shivers erupt up my spine. I looked at Rufus. What will it cost? I want your loyalty, Maude. I spoke without thinking. I want Reasonable, I said quickly. I want him to leave with us when the 12 days are past. He loved this exchange. You know he is married. I am married, I whispered back. He looked at me, sitting back so he could take in my face. Are you now? I nodded, scared and unsure as to why I had revealed that tidbit. I am. Happily? I have seen him twice since our wedding night. I could see the conversation pleased him. Miserable marriages enjoy company. Did he love another? You didn't get an annulment or a divorce? It was complicated. You should have been allowed to divorce. He was almost angry. I tried to scan the room to see if he was still there. Is he here? He was a gossiping maid, delighted. He looked around. You must tell me, Maude. I am the king. I think my appearance frightened him away, Your Majesty. What man of court has married a witch? You must tell me. I tell you what, I said. He leant in, beaming. We are to give you gifts on the 7th night, is that correct? You are. I will give you his name. The perfect present. Gossip. I laughed. I actually laughed. He tucked a curl behind my ear. I will give you reasonable if you give me a true answer about Anne. I nodded. I will organize for you to be let into her rooms and be with her ladies. Yes, Your Majesty. I will be sad to lose reasonable again, he said. What is it you call him? You do not call him by the name I gave him. I wondered if I was to get in trouble. I call him Rufus. Rufus, he repeated. May I ask why His Majesty calls him reasonable? I am his name-giver. I christened him with it when we were mayhap 10 or 12. Reasonable, because he is just that, and Blackman, because he is just that.